Welcome to this Norton College History video blog, Unit 3 Protest Guide to the Exam. The Unit 3 Protest exam will last for an hour and 15 minutes and it's worth 53 marks. You've studied 4 areas of protest in your protest exam: the suffragettes, the general strike, the miners' strike and the poll tax protests. The exam will probably focus on just one of these 4 different protests. This video blog will give you a guide about how to answer the exam questions. In the protest exam, there are no choices of questions. You have to answer all questions on the paper. There are 5 questions in total, and you need to be really careful about your timing in this exam. You should probably devote about 1.5 minutes per mark. So for example, if a question is worth 6 marks, then you should spend 9 minutes on it. Like question 5 is worth 16 marks, you should spend 24 minutes on that question. There is only an hour and 15 minutes available, and it's really important that you answer all 5 questions. One of the key skills in this exam is source skills, and using the ideas of NOP will help you to be successful on those source skills. NOP stands for nature, origin and purpose. And these are the kind of things that we analyse when we're really trying to evaluate historical sources on this exam. These skills will also help you in Unit 1, Crime and Punishment. Nature means what type of source is it? Is it a diary, a poster, a cartoon, or maybe even a newspaper? The nature of the source quite often affects how reliable it is. For example, newspapers can often be quite biased. An example of this was the Times during the era of the suffragettes. The Times newspaper was often biased against the suffragettes. Origin means who wrote it, when it was written, and also where. So for example, it might have been written by the government, or it might be an opinion poll, or it might be by one of the leaders of the protests. For example, if a speech is from someone like Arthur Scargill, then it might be biased in favour of the National Union of Mine Workers. The purpose of a source means why was the source made? For what reason? What was it intended to do? So for example, was a poster designed to help a government win power again? Was a speech made to gain publicity for a cause? And this can often help you to understand whether a source is reliable. Question 2 in the protest exam has a real focus on purpose. So here follows some tips on how to answer each question. Question 1 is worth 6 marks and you should spend 9 minutes on it. This question requires you to make 2 supported inferences. An inference means what can you work out from something. It's a little bit like reading between the lines. So some useful phrases to use are things like, I can infer that. But you also need to support your inferences, and you do that by quoting the source. So use a phrase like, I can tell this because it says in source A, and then show that you're supporting your inference by quoting the source. Remember, your quotes should be short and snappy, just like baby crocodiles. It's really important that you don't spend too long on question 1. 9 minutes maximum to make sure that you have enough time to answer the more high value questions towards the end of the paper. Question number 2 is worth 8 marks and therefore you have 12 minutes. This question requires you to evaluate the purpose of a source, and to do this you need to write about the content of the source and also use your own knowledge. Now it's really important in this question to really analyse the language or the images chosen and link this to purpose. For example, in this source that you can see here, you might need to think about why have they chosen this particular image? Why have they chosen the words torturing women in prison? What's the purpose behind this source? You want to try and link it to the NOP of the source, trying to think about who has written the source, what's the origin of the source, and how that might tell you what the purpose might be. For example, if a source was written by someone like Emmeline Pankhurst, the leader of the suffragettes, that might give you a clue to what her purpose might be, probably to gain publicity for the suffragette cause. You also need to include relevant own knowledge of the event. So again, in this example, you need to give some relevant background information and background knowledge about what's going on in the picture. Here you can see the force feeding of women during the suffragette protest. Some useful phrases are to use phrases like the purpose of the source is to, focus on what the source portrays, and you also need to try and link in with your own knowledge. Top tip, really analyse why has an author chosen particular images and languages. What effect are they meant to have on the reader? Try and use some of the skills that you use in your English language paper in this question. Question number 3 is worth 10 marks and you should spend 15 minutes on it. This question requires you to use a historical source and your own knowledge to answer a question about the past. The most important exam requirement in here is to make sure that you do use the source and you also use your own knowledge. Own knowledge must be extra information that you know which is not in the historical source. There's some useful phrases for you there, but the top tips on this question are to make sure you use the sources and knowledge together and try and give at least 3 detailed reasons. Try to use detailed evidence and try and answer in depth. Don't just think that one example will be enough. The question is worth 10 marks, so you should be writing a good amount on this question. You have 15 minutes to do it. Question number 4 is also worth 10 marks, and you have 15 minutes for this question. In this question, you'll be given 2 historical sources, and you need to compare them to say how reliable they are. That means how truthful are they in terms of telling you about a particular historical event. Now, there's 2 things that you need to do to make sure that you are able to evaluate the reliability of the 2 sources. You must use NOP, the nature, origin and purpose, and you must use your own knowledge. When using NOP, you need to consider whether the nature, the origin or the purpose of the source affects its reliability. So, for example, if you had a speech from Margaret Thatcher during the poll tax riots, you'd need to think about whether the fact it's written by her would affect how reliable and truthful the source might be. When using your own knowledge, you need to think about whether the source is backed up by your own knowledge of the event. If it is, then what own knowledge do you have that actually backs up and reinforces the source? It might be that you have own knowledge that is missing from the actual historical source, which might suggest the source is less reliable because it doesn't give the whole story. So you must use NOP and own knowledge. Now, in terms of structure, the best way to structure it is to have a paragraph on, say, source D, a paragraph on, say, source E, and then a conclusion where you give your own opinion and why for which is the most reliable source. Try and remember to avoid generalisations like the camera never lies, and try and consider whether the author would be biased and why this would make them unreliable. So that is how to do question number 4. Question number 5. The last question on the Unit 3 process exam requires you to evaluate an interpretation using both sources and your own knowledge. Now, in terms of the exam requirements for this question, you must use both the sources and your own knowledge to find evidence to agree and disagree with an interpretation. Now, interpretation is an opinion, so in this example that you can see here, the opinion is the general strike did threaten revolution in Britain. In terms of structuring this answer, you'd want to have a paragraph that agrees with the opinion, the interpretation, and then you'd need a paragraph that disagrees with the interpretation, and then you would want an overall conclusion. So you want to have 3 paragraphs for this answer: evidence to agree, evidence to disagree, and a conclusion. One really useful tip is when you're reading the 3 sources before you answer the question is to annotate them, to underline key points and make a note of which sources agree and which sources disagree with the opinion. Make sure you use the sources and own knowledge together, and you also get SPAG marks for this question, 3 additional marks. So if you do have time at the end of the exam, make sure, particularly for question 5, that you scope your work so that you can check your spelling, punctuation and grammar. So I hope you found that video blog useful to give you some top tips on Unit 3 protest. Remember, read the background information about the protest. In the exam there will be a short 6-7 line introduction to the protest, which might give you a little bit of extra information to help you to be thinking about the protest. Read all the questions really carefully, underlining the key points. Use the BUSY acronym of boxing the command words, underlining key points, scribbling out a plan, and then you're ready to start a great answer, particularly for question 5. Tied into reading the question properly, make sure you use the correct historical sources. Sometimes when we're reading the exam quickly, we might get the sources wrong, and if we did that, then we wouldn't get any marks for our answers. And make sure you're really careful with timing. Time yourself properly so you leave enough time to answer all the questions. If you are running out of time, make sure that you do answer question number 5, since because of the SPAG marks, this question is worth 19 marks. Good luck. I hope you found that blog useful. Keep revising. Thank you very much.